U.S. Marines outnumbered and under fire. One ship responds heroically. A massive enemy fleet bears down. With little chance for survival, the captain orders his ship to attack. A sudden explosion sends a huge fireball throughout the ship. The captain makes a fateful decision. He must stop fighting the fires or let his ship sink. What kind of men and women answer the call to defend her every time? What sort of crew prove again and again that there's no higher honor than to command the USS Samuel B. Roberts?
The Navy refused to let the name Samuel B. Roberts float off into retirement. And so in 1984, they launched the third Samuel B. Roberts, ffg58.
Like her predecessor, the third Sammy B would find herself on the world stage. In 1988, the Iran-Iraq War had spilled into the Gulf, threatening oil shipments in and out of the region.
Our job and our direction from Admiral S to prevent those attacks from taking place and to guarantee free shipping throughout the Persian Gulf.
It was apparent from the very first night that they were in a very, very dangerous part of the world. You had Iraqi warplanes armed with missiles, you had Iranian warships running around firing their guns, and worst of all was the threat of mines.
On April 14th, the Roberts dropped off 2 tankers in Kuwait and headed back south.
It was about 4:30 on a cloudy day when the lookout on the forecastle of the Roberts spotted floating objects in front, and he called up to the bridge.
The phone in my cabin rang, and I picked it up, and the first words out of my officer of the deck's mouth was, "Captain, I think we have some mines."
The ship shuddered to a halt as Wren raced up to the bridge. 3 mines were clearly visible. The Roberts had entered a minefield of undetermined size and scope. The time was 4:39 p.m.
There isn't any school that tells you what to do to get out of a minefield, nor is there any school that tells you how the minefields are laid. We reported it to Combat East Force. They quickly came back and told us not to get within 1,000 yards of them. That didn't help much.
Out on the flight deck, Bob Bent was exercising when Captain Wren began speaking over the 1MC.
He just said, we're in a minefield and we're going to go ahead and proceed to general quarters. To go from just exercising 1 minute to knowing that you're in a minefield, it was kind of overwhelming. It just hit you like a ton of bricks.
Wren's options were limited. A ship at sea can't simply stop in place. Moving several feet in any direction might mean hitting a mine. Potentially worse was the fact the Roberts would be a sitting duck for enemy warplanes and surface craft.
We had about 55 minutes of daylight left, and I didn't really want to be in this position in a minefield if it got dark.
So Wren thought about it for a little while, and he said, okay, well, we got in, we can get out. Because back behind him was this pale white trail all the way back to Kuwait.
I wanted to back directly down that wake and be straight right in the heart of it.
So Wren gave the order to back out. But the problem was that the Roberts had a blunt stern, a 1 screw, and 1 rudder. It makes backing the ship hydrodynamically akin to throwing a paper airplane backwards. It's just very, very difficult to back out in a straight line.
Down in central control, Chief Engineer of the Watch, Dave Walker, passed word down to the ship's lowest level. Everyone working in the lowest decks of the ship needs to immediately come up a level.
The one thing that comes forward in a moment like this more than anything else is that those 214 guys on the ship believe that you're the guy with the answer. And they trust in you that you're the one who's going to find the way out.
Time was very slow. It seemed like we would never get out of there.
in the process of backing and being very confident that we could get out of the minefield, suddenly the largest explosion that I've seen in my entire naval service took place.
I just went flying in the air and really was disoriented.
And the sound is very different than the sound you hear in the movies. It's not a booming sound, it's a cracking sound.
It was 250 pounds of TNT going off right next to the hull, and it put a truck-sized hole in the ship below the water line. And the engine room filled immediately.
It filled that space with water in probably 10 seconds. So we went from being a 4,000-ton frigate to a 6,000-ton frigate in about 30 seconds.
We're now standing inside the main engine room, or the MER. Inside the space, when the mine struck, the whole level that we're standing on right now was covered by either salt water or fuel, and that fuel was hot. The fuel was on fire, and the water was coming through that bulkhead that's right behind me.
The mine explosion also blew out a seal around the shaft extending from the MER into the auxiliary space behind it, called AUX 3. It too flooded within seconds.
When this space flooded, it caused the ship service diesel generators to shut off, to kick off the line, and it caused the ship to go dark.
So not only were the main engines disintegrated and the space full with water and on fire, and most of our electrical grid wiped out, but the main space behind it that had additional electrical power, refrigeration units, evaporators, and water capability was also destroyed, all within the space of about 50 seconds.
But what was more, the ship was also on fire, because when that mine went off, it sent super hot gases into the engine room. And these gases expanded and went up through the ship's air ducts, setting fires on 4 decks as they went along, until they finally burst from the ship's stack in a huge fireball.
The Middle East Force Headquarters alerts the Roberts. Help is on the way. But Commander Wren tells them to stay away. They are in a minefield, without any way of determining its size. The Roberts will have to save herself. But back in 1988, when the Roberts struck the mine, damage control suddenly faced conditions no one had ever imagined.
Wasn't really sure we could save the ship. Why? Well, you're sinking at the rate of a foot every 5 minutes. You're burning and you can't stop the flames because you don't have any water to fight the fires with. You don't know how many of your guys are dead. It's getting dark. The nearest guys to you are your adversaries and they're armed. You're in a damn minefield, and the 3 you see are not the ones that got you, and you don't know how many more there are. Oh, and by the way, the sharks just showed up, and so did the sea snakes, so you're having a great day.
Without power, the central control and damage control teams were blind. Fire suppression systems failed to engage. Radar and communications consoles designed to survive a total power failure were not working. The crew had never trained for this scenario.
We're here in CCS, or Central Control Station, on board the Samuel B. Roberts. When the ship actually struck the mine, the whole ship went dark, and the people in here were scurrying or quickly trying to figure out how to get electricity back to the ship. We needed to be able to pump the water out of the spaces that were flooding. Also inside the space, they would have been trying to get the fire pumps back online in order to get the firefighting water that we need to fight the fires that were going on throughout the ship.
One of those manning central control was Bob Bent.
I just got up and went right to the electric plant and tried to do whatever I could to keep the power on, which it did. Tried to get down to auxiliary machinery room 2 to get at the engines to try to get power back, because that was my charge. I stepped into the space, and it was a fella named Larry Welch, and he looked really bad, burnt. He's just really in bad shape, and I helped him out of the space and brought him back to the after repair locker to get him some help. And then I went back to seal that door off. And when I had heard another voice in there, and I heard someone yelling for help.
Chief Petty Officer Alex Perez was trapped underneath the floor grate and up to his neck in burning, fuel-soaked water.
We told Al he's going to have to go underneath all these cables and swim underneath it to get up. And he knew we showed him where it was, and he did, and he got out.
About 5-6 minutes into it, the lights start to flicker, just like the movie Titanic. But in Titanic, they went out. On Samuel B. Roberts, they go back on. Nobody knows why they go back on. Nobody knows how we got power back to the grid. How did we start one of those damn diesel engines?
Right now, we're in Ox 1. This is the space where there was the only last generator. All the other generators were taken out by the mine.
Well, it's Tilly, a fireman, who goes into the diesel enclosure and looks up and sees that the diesel governor has been shattered and that the diesel cannot be started in an automatic.
So the guy had to come down into space. He had to do a local start. We call it a dead man start because he had to go inside of the closure, which is very dangerous. So he went inside and actually started that diesel up.
We get power back to the grid. The first thing we do is we energize the missile launcher and we cycle the missile, we bring it up. Lo and behold, we can shoot.
The crew was down here trying to prevent this bulkhead behind me from buckling or any more water from coming inside this space. So they were erecting shoring and putting whatever they could inside the holes and cracks.
I saw guys down in that space. They were using everything imaginable to control the flooding.
35 minutes after the mine explosion, Wren received word the flooding in AMR-2 was contained. But somehow, the Roberts continued to sink.
And suddenly it dawns on me, we're sinking ourselves. We're putting more water on the ship than we're pumping off the ship.
The fires were burning out of control, but Captain Wren knew that the only way to save the Roberts was to stop fighting the fires. "40 minutes after striking the mine, damage control teams had secured the flooding, but fires burned out of control across 4 decks. The Roberts is also sinking. The huge amounts of seawater used to douse the fires were actually causing her to sink. Wren's decision to cease all firefighting efforts stuns his executive officer.
I'll say this in a much nicer fashion than he said. He asked me if I had lost my mind. And I had told him that we were sinking like a rock and that we had about another 45 minutes to an hour to live. And if we didn't stop the sinking, we wouldn't have to worry about the fires anymore because the ocean was going to put them out.
Wren's gamble paid off. In only a few minutes, the water level began to hold steady, enabling the damage control crew to resume fighting the fires. Then, Wren decided to roll the dice once more.
We had kept the ship from sinking any further. We had to deal with the fire, but we had to get out of that minefield.
Wren ordered the auxiliary power units powered up and turned the ship to course 147. As the Roberts limped for safety, the blazes that had burned aboard the frigate for over 4 hours were at last extinguished.
I think it was the first time in all of that evolution that we said, I think we've done this. I think we've saved the ship. I think we've saved ourselves.
The morning after the Roberts escaped the minefield, the Navy sent divers to recover some of these floating weapons. And they traced the serial numbers on those mines to Iran and sent the news all the way back to Washington, up to the White House. And President Reagan vowed revenge.
4 days after the mining of the Roberts, the Navy launched Operation Praying Mantis, a combined air and surface attack on the Iranian military.
This was a day-long battle in which U.S. ships and airplanes went after Iranian forces. And by the end of the day, they had put 1 Iranian frigate to the bottom, heavily damaged another, sunk a couple of armed power boats, put 2 Iranian oil platforms out of commission. It was the biggest surface warfare action since World War II.
The success of Operation Praying Mantis helped convince Iran that it could not prevail in its war with Iraq. 3 months after the Roberts was struck, Tehran agreed to a ceasefire that ended this bloody conflict that had stretched on for 8 years.
But the ripples don't stop there, because the ceasefire allowed Saddam Hussein to pull his troops away from the Iranian borders, and 2 years later, he sent them into Kuwait. And this, of course, engendered Operation Desert Storm, which was the first time that the U.S. and Iraq came into direct conflict.
After returning home, the U.S. Navy restored the USS Samuel B. Roberts to its former glory. Reminders to train for the unexpected can be found below deck. There, mounted on the wall, is a bronze plaque honoring those who sailed aboard the first Sammy B. It was placed there by the commander of the 3rd USS Samuel B. Roberts, Paul Ridd.
The captain closed his report saying of the Roberts, "We saved her, we'll fix her, and we'll fight again." And he signed off with their motto, "No higher honor."
Big ships get all the honor. Small ships don't hear too much of them. We did something that they never did. We fought the Jap fleet and more or less nailed the coffin on the Japanese fleet.
During the mine explosion, crew members passing by touched it and remembered those heroic sailors.
Their fighting will has been passed on to me to protect the ship for my term and future sailors who will come onto the ship and serve our country.
The crew, to this day, they're still out there doing it. They're living up to the heritage from the 1st and 2nd ships that were named Roberts and Sammy B himself.
It was a ship that believed they played and worked and acted in a legacy. And I think that that was something that we drove home every day on board the ship. Integrity, pride, honesty, hard work, and absolute, total, unadulterated pride in who they were and what the name of the ship meant.
Well, quite frankly, there is no higher honor than being the commanding officer of the Samuel B. Roberts.